In this video, we're going to talk about C# variables, variable scope, and modifiers. I'm going to assume that you have some knowledge of variables because up to this point, we've talked about it quite a bit. So maybe at some point you've had some programming experience. You understand that a variable is a container for a value, and that can be an actual value or it can be a memory pointer, like from our previous video, understanding value types and reference types. But at any rate, a value basically has a name and it has a data type associated with it. So here we have a simple example of a variable definition or a variable declaration. And here we can see that we're going to create a variable called I, and it's going to be of type integer. And then on the very next line, we actually assign a value to I, which is 30. And just one quick note about scope. In this context, the variable I is only available within the scope of our static void main function within our application. If you were to have another method, let's call method 2, and if we were to create one right here, the void method 2, you would not be able to see the variable I from here. You'd have to declare it again. But those would be two different values. It would not be the same value. So there's the concept of scope, that within here I would be 30 within the remainder of this function until its value is changed. And in this function we can also have the variable I, and we can assign it to 40. So this is a pretty simple example. The next we have, kind of to contrast this, you can create a variable definition and assign the value all in one fell swoop, and we've done that quite a bit through the course of our videos. Here we created a variable called J, and we've declared it as type integer, and we went ahead and assigned it to a value of 15 right away. Now here's another way. We talked about the for next loops. Here we have the creation of an integer and the assignment of it right within the context of the for loop. Now, I make a note here within the context of the for loop, and there's two things to know about for loops and do-while loops. First of all, since J has already been declared, I can't do this. You cannot declare the value J again, even though it's within a for loop. I can't come down here and declare integer J again. Once it's been declared, you cannot declare it again. Also, if you'll notice here, I'm going to print out the value of I and print out the value of J. However, I cannot do this, print out the value of K, because K is defined within the scope of this for next loop. Now that might be foreign to some of you who come from a VB world, because you could go ahead and declare an instance inside your for loop, and you'd be able to see it, outside of the loop itself. But you cannot do that in C#. So we're going to have to comment these lines out. Okay, this brings us to our next topic, which is the topic of modifiers. These were local variables. In other words, these variables only have context, only have meaning within the course of this local method. However, there's other types of variables that we can declare. And I'm going to scroll down here to a class called testConsumer. And in this case, I've created a series of fields called M, N, O, and P. And I went ahead and set M to 1, N to 2, O to 3, and P to 4. And I used different modifiers. And these modifiers will adjust who and what within the remainder of our code or other applications exterior to this particular class, if they're able to see these variables and their associated values or not. So we have 4 that we're going to take a look at. The first one is public, then private, protected, and then internal. Public means that this value, the value of M, will be able to be seen by any other piece of code within our application or exterior to our application. Say this was compiled as a component, you would be able to see the value of M, and you'd be able to retrieve its value as well. So public means exactly what it sounds like, that it's accessible to anybody or to any set of code with no restriction. The next one is private, however. This is the exact opposite, where within our class we can access the value of n. However, outside of our class you cannot access that value. And we'll have a demonstration of this in just a moment. The next accessibility modifier is protected. And protected means that it's sort of like private. It can be used anywhere within the class TestConsumer. So, for example, this method here can see our protected variable O and reassign its value. However, it cannot be seen outside of this class with one exception. The exception is that if you create a class that derives from TestConsumer, then it will be able to access the value of O and the variable O as well. The final one, we won't take too much time to look at this one here, but I will explain what it does. It's called internal. Internal allows anything within our class. So no matter which class it's in, this whole application that we're going to compile, anything within our application can see the value of P. However, anything from outside the application, say from another component, another application, will not be able to see the value of P. So what we've done to kind of demonstrate this is within our static void main, what I've done was created an instance of TestConsumer class, and then I called the tested method, and then what that does is it populates the values or changes the values from what they were originally set at. And then it allows us to see which of the values can we actually set. Now you'll see here, first of all, that we're able to do a console.writeLine m, and I make a note here that this is a public variable, and so I just access it by going tc for TestConsumer.m.toString. So this will return the value of m. And then also I'm able to do the console.writeLine p internal and write that out. However, notice that I had to comment out lines where I would want to print the value of n and the value of O. And the reason is because n is private, and therefore you cannot see this value outside of its own class definition. And the value of O, if you remember, was protected. And since this is outside of that class's definition and we're not deriving from that class to create a new class, we cannot see the value of O. Now, what I want to do real quick is just take our instance of the TestConsumer and then select the button, and you'll notice that the help that pops up, we're only able to see two methods. And notice that next to the P, right here, you see a little envelope, and that denotes it as being an internal only, usable only within the context of its own application type variable. Now, the next thing I want to do is demonstrate the use of the protected method or the protected accessibility modifier. Excuse me. And so I'm going to scroll down to another class that I've created called Derived TestConsumer, and it derives from TestConsumer class. Now what's significant about this is that since it derives from TestConsumer, we will be able to see the value O. Now recall, O is protected. However, we're able to access it and then take it off and put it into a public variable so that whatever O was set to within our original definition will get printed to the screen whenever anybody accesses the value of Z. Does that make sense? I sure hope so. So let's go ahead and take a look at our static void main. And you see here that I create an instance of derived TestConsumer called DTC, and I call the tested function to actually retrieve the value of O and put it into the public member of Z, and then I write Z out, which is actually the value of O. Okay, I hope I didn't confuse it too much. when you download the code, take a look at it, try some things out. Maybe it'll make more sense to you. And I'm going to do like I did in the previous example where I was actually typed in DTC. And now you can see that we have 3 variables. We have the public variable M because we derive from it. We automatically get M, which was a public variable, or field rather. We get P because that's internal. And then we also get Z because Z is public, and it will retrieve the value of O. So let's go ahead and delete that out. Let's compile what we've got. And then we're going to bring up our command window, and here I'm going to type in CS2310, which should have been created for us. Whoops. Okay, now I'm in the right spot. So I'm going to type in CS2310, and after a moment, notice what gets printed out here onto our screen. The value of I is 30, the value of J is 15. And then we have our M, P, and Z. Our public value of M set to 5. Our internal value P is set to 8, and our protected value of Z is set to 3, as we would have expected. So I hope that this video was helpful in understanding how accessibility modifiers for variables work. We looked at the variable scope and why certain variables can be seen within certain sections of code while they can't be seen in other sections of code, and just maybe a basic understanding of how variables can hold values and how they can be used within your